a plan that probably only makes sense to my brain, so I can turn it into words, and then people can say, that sounds like a great plan, or overthrow me and install their own plan. How does that sound? Yeah, thumbs up, hell yeah. Okay, so I thought we could do like a cute intro where we make a sound to show how we're feeling inside. And then once we do that, we could do like a little free writing on just what was like clarifying or eye-opening or interesting about the stuff we read, and then what was like totally baffling and confusing. And then after that, we like share, and then a little 15-minute review of chapter 1, because I know it was kind of rushed last time, and like people had to like come and go, so just kind of like getting on the same page there. And then spending the rest of the time we have on chapters 2 and 3. And then we can either just based on what was confusing, tackle those chapters using what we come up with then, or if not, there's also like passages that I've highlighted that like if we can understand these passages, I think it's like we are on a good page. So those are two potential ways we could go about talking about chapter 2 and 3. But how does all of that sound to everyone?
Yay!
Good.
Hell yeah, get nods.
Do that.
I like that.
Raven likes to plan.
Strong support,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, we can do the sounds at first. I'm just so happy seeing everyone's faces. So I'm definitely like, I don't know if you could hear that sound, but it was a high-pitched squeal. I don't know if you want to hear next.
That was gonna be my sound.
You still do it.
Everybody's sound.
Oh, me next?
That was a really good sound. My sound is ah! I don't know what it means. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Oh wait, I just realized maybe can we also do names and sounds?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We'll start over. Okay,
Yeah.
Rojas, E.
Chris.
Raven.
Lena.
Brian.
Gray. That's how I feel. Yeah.
I'm Zach. I would say after pretty much every chapter in this, confused noise.
I can imagine the asterisks on either side. Oh, I think Raviv said he'll be right back. So.
Oh, word. Then does everyone have like either pen or paper, or like a Word document they could type into? Does everyone feel ready to write? Okay, I'll start a timer and then I'll put the questions in the chat so everyone can see them.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. I'm ready.
Do you want to go first then, Chris? And then
Yeah.
popcorn people?
Yeah. Okay, so the part that I found interesting, cool, nice was where he was like, money doesn't make any sense, prices are imaginary. And the further it gets of money from being a symbol to being a symbol, or just like the easier it is to hide like where value is coming from, like what the truth is. And then he kind of said this when it's like it only makes sense, like these prices and money and money, commodity, blah, 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 blah. This whole system only makes sense because everyone literally agrees to enter the market with these rules. That's what like makes it like this communal, like, okay, this decision to accept this as something that makes sense is what keeps it going. I'm not sure if he worded it exactly. He kind of says it without saying it in those words, but what I got that was interesting or like nice about it was just like, yes, this is something that we decide every day. So something we can undecide too. That was exciting to see. And then did somebody hear that? I was like kind of hovering. Was it on mute this whole time? No.
Can people hear Chris?
Oh, okay.
The mic's just really quiet.
Okay, I'll just look here. And then the part I found confusing, or just like maybe just wanting to go over, was maybe if we could just go over like step by step the different contradictions. And then be like, these are contradictory because this, right? And then we can move on to the next contradiction. That would be helpful. And then if we could go over where like the commodity moves from like a commodity to a universal. Well, I guess this is kind of a whole chapter. That's my. I think I'm just gonna say just the bit where going over contradictions. That would be helpful.
Cool.
Yeah.
Popcorn something?
Popcorn, Brian. Brian?
Hey, can people hear me?
You're in a robot voice.
Let's see. Hey, can people hear me?
It comes and goes, but we heard the last thing you said. Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I don't know why the signal got worse for a second. Maybe I'll try like putting it like this. Let's see. Yeah, I'm having.
That's a lot better.
Yeah.
Cool. I
Yeah.
seem to be having better luck right now from right here. I'm in the basement of Shantanu's house. Our friend from school. Yeah. Let's see. Like kind of lingering questions that are like still there for me after so last year Muriel House and Chris did a group like this together. I was doing another one with some friends at the new school. I was starting to I also there's this really good like kind of reader's guide to capital by this guy William Clare Roberts that I think is excellent, called Marx's Inferno, that came out a couple of years ago. And so but from that last round of readings, a couple of things that are still in my mind that I like that it'll be cool to maybe bring to the table this time through are continuing to clarify where Marx diverges from a lot of the utopian socialists and anarchists of the time, because lots of folks who have a critique of who'd be writing stuff that's called critique of political economy, lots of folks who have similar critiques of money, similar critiques of like nascent capitalism, but very different understandings of what it is. So kind of like I'm kind of ongoingly interested in sort of how the Marx is like positioning himself amongst a field of different thinkers who present themselves as either utopian socialists and anarchists, but sees what he's doing as like a little bit different. So I'm interested in these couple of chapters and pinpointing some of those points of difference. In terms of confusion, I never understand what commodity fetishism is all about. It gets more and more confusing to me every time through the text. So that's always a question for me. This is a confusion that we talked about a lot in my groups last year, but it's right at the start of the text, and for me, it's it was kind of like a point that we returned to over and over again. But it's like that very first sentence of the first chapter, where we learn. Let's see, I'll get there real quick. That the history. Well, basically the line is that the history in the history of capitalism, wealth presents itself, or wealth appears as an immense collection of commodities. And the question that we asked over and over again was like, is Marx just saying that wealth appears this way as an immense collection of commodities, or is he saying it actually is this way, that wealth is actually an immense collection of commodities? And it's kind of like this, like I forget, like this is old like stand-up comedy or like, you know, like sketch comedy duo where like the famous joke is like, I might appear to be like a sack of shit, but don't let that fool you. I actually am a sack of shit, like in fact, you know. And so, but so like, yeah, this question of like whether what we're getting in these first few chapters is the beginning of an analysis of how wealth actually is in capitalist societies, or whether we're getting a description of like how wealth appears, like sort of spontaneously or just in everyday life for us, is kind of like one that's unresolved for me.
Thanks, Brian. Do you want to popcorn someone?
Yes, totally. Let's do popcorn. Why not Gray?
Can we popcorn or leave?
I actually had something to say in response to what you were talking about.
Cool.
I feel like there's a thread in these opening couple chapters where Marx does a lot of this like okay, you have this like underlying thing that can take on different forms and appears to us in different ways. Like for instance, like the value form of a commodity can have like myriads of different forms depending on like exchange relations and stuff. Like that's like the latter half of chapter 1, or like most importantly, it has like the money form. And I think I can't remember exactly where, but I feel like he makes a similar statement about wealth, about how, like he said, like the opening line is wealth appears as an accumulation of commodities. But I feel like elsewhere he says something like, maybe I'm just imagining this, but I feel like he says something that like what wealth actually is like useful labor, or like a combination of labor and the earth, something like that. And I think he's making a similar argument where like that's the actual thing, and the way it appears to us like phenomenally is through commodities or something. At least that was my read on it. Yeah.
Nice. I want to pin that discussion, and we'll come back to it once we dive into the text of chapter 1 and 2, and 2 and 3, I guess. Gray, did you want to go, or did you want to pass the ball to someone else, which is a totally fair move?
I think I'm like, I don't really know if anything has been super, like, if I've understood it, anything to the point where it's like super clarifying or opening yet. I think there's a lot of things where I'm like, wow, that's like, I don't know, like I've never like seen this like put into words before, but like I still feel like there's a lot that I'm like not getting quite yet. So I guess like my answer is that I'm confused about just like everything, and like reread the text a lot. And so yeah, not a lot to contribute, but I'm like just happy to be here and listen to what you guys and stuff. So yeah, do you want to say what you found?
Oh yeah.
Clarifying and confusing.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I think one thing I found that was cool in chapter 2. Are we allowed to talk about chapter 2 right now? Is that fun? Yeah, okay. So I think I mentioned this last week, but I've been like sort of trying to watch this like lecture series on Capital by this like economic historian named Moishe Pastone, and he's like a brilliant reader of Marx. And one of the things he says is like that Marx takes the commodity to be like the keystone of capitalism, and that the whole idea of the beginning of the book is he starts with this one category and kind of derives all of capitalism from it. He says something like he wants to unfold all of capitalism from this one idea of a commodity. I didn't really understand what he meant by that, But then in chapter 2, I started to get it because it's all about how like the fact of commodities and like the way they work is exactly what makes it necessary to have things like private property and like control and ownership of land and stuff like that. That's like the first or second paragraph of chapter 2, like where he talks about like if commodities need to be exchanged between people, then people need to control commodities. And because commodities are objects and anyone can just take them, they need to impose like artificial like powers over like their land and their like collections of commodities and stuff. So I thought that was really cool how he's literally just starting from this idea of a commodity and like just getting all of capitalism from it. One thing I didn't understand in that same light though is that how it seems like the way he defines commodity is very abstract and could apply to like non-capitalist societies as well. Like something he says it's a commodity is just something that has utility, satisfies some want, and can be exchanged. And that's a little weird to me because I don't feel like he wants to say that like I think what he wants to say is that commodities are unique to capitalist society, but it doesn't seem like that's true from the way he set it up. Because I think like a lot of different kinds of societies would have objects that satisfy wants and can be exchanged, but definitely aren't commodities in the same way he's talking about. So that's one thing I was confused about.
No.
Oh, you like popcorn? I don't know who hasn't gone yet. Just like raise your hand if you haven't gone.
Lena, Zach, and Raymond.
All right, let's go to Zach.
All right. So the main thing that confuses me about Marx, does anyone know whether he wrote in English actually himself or if it's translated from German? Okay, so it's translated from German. Okay. I guess the best metaphor would be like, have any of you guys ever read A Clockwork Orange? Reading that book is so confusing. You basically just have to have like a dictionary of terms in the book open at the same time. And it's a lot like that because you'll look at something, a phrase that he's talking about, like for example, commodity fetishism, and then you look it up, you read the definition, and that literally makes no sense either. So now you're just doubly confused about what's happening. But I would say that was the most confusing part of it. I think the most interesting part I gleaned from this chapter is sort of the difference in how he views value. It seems like, aside from the labor theory of value, which is really famous, Marx sort of disputes the idea that scarcity is as big of a factor as it is viewed in capitalism. He thinks it's more about labor, and I think he also introduces a distinction between use value and exchange value, which is like something can have a much higher price on the market than it can actually have in terms of value to society and that sort of thing. Yeah, and that's what I got from it. Okay, who hasn't gone yet? What? Okay, I'll let go because hear what you're saying. Sorry.
Lena, Rojas, and Raymond have not gone.
Okay. Lena.
Okay, cool. I really have to resist the urge to like comment on the things you guys were saying because those are so interesting. But yeah, so I guess it's kind of similar to what Chris was saying about contradictions. The part that I just like wrote verbatim, like in my notes, was on page 209, where it talks about, let's see, I'll just like read it because it's not that much. Where is it? Oh, okay. There is an antithesis imminent to the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particular concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as a merely abstract universal labor, between the conversion of things into person and the conversion of persons into things. I'll just stop there. And then it talks about, and then later it's like the eminent contradiction, and it like says more about that. And eminence, like I know Raviv and I have talked a bit about immanence because of Spinoza, and like it's that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was interesting and clarifying, and like helped me clarify his relationship to Hegel a little bit, because I was like wondering where it shows up. And it also occurred to me that just as we've been talking about it, that the first line of Capital is like very Hegelian, and that it's like stating the thesis first and then going antithesis and then thesis. You know what I mean? Like it's the reverse of the Hegelian form. Anyway, that's like, yeah. So I think something, I don't know if this was like, while I was reading, I was confused about the American system now, that like, and how it applies, because I know that the gold standard is no longer used. And so much of this chapter is about the gold standard. But then it talks about paper money, and we've gotten rid of the gold standard like 100 years ago. And so I was like, what is that? Like, how do we reconcile this? And then I was like, oh, he's like, anything could be substituted. You know what I mean? And so this accounts for cryptocurrency and all of that. So those were two things that I felt like this chapter clarified for me. Or these two chapters, yeah. Oh, popcorn Raymond.
Oh, hi everyone.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay. What did I like about this chapter, or what was clarifying? Let me see. I like the section on hoarding, and then that quote that you had just read, Lena, about like, oh, things and people, like the way like commodities like and take labor time and make it into like, or like, yeah, take labor time and make it into a commodity, and then that you can hoard it, you can just have it, and that you can, and then he had talked too about like slavery, and that being like, oh, like at one point like man was like really considered a commodity, or I guess still was at the time it was written, and still is with like wage labor. I also really like, I kind of focus on smaller things. I really like the use of the word alienating a lot. That just like really resonated with me. And then what were like questions I had or things that were challenging? I was feeling I might just like get caught up on the little things that maybe like you don't even need to really read into carefully, trying to get the whole idea of Marx. But okay. So at one point he had said like you can have objects with price but without value. And I think I understand what he was saying, because then the example was like if you have a piece of land that, like if you have a piece of land, you can have a price on that land, but if it's uncultivated, it doesn't have value. And I guess by that he means that like no work has been put into it. So then that's like Mother Earth versus like, because in chapter 1 he's like, oh, there's like the earth provides resources and then human labor is like also a resource. But I'm still a little confused on objects having price but no value. And then also at one point he was talking about like gold and silver, and then like, oh, like what happens if the exchange rate between gold and silver changes? And then I was thinking of like the way exchange rates work, right? Like between like pesos and dollars and all the different currencies of the world. And I don't know, I guess that he doesn't really go into that, and exchange rates were a lot different when he was around, but I guess that goes back to like the gold standard too. And now that we don't have the gold standard, we have currency. there's also a bit where he talks about like some people say money is fake or money's not real because it's just a symbol. But then if that's true, then like all commodities are symbols.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about that too. Okay. But I think I follow. And yeah, I also am like interested in what everyone else has been saying. Yeah. I would like to talk for real life.
Oh, nice. Sorry, I got text. Okay, things I thought were interesting. I'll just be really quick. My relationship to chapter 2 and 3 is one of being either like slightly confused, but not really wanting to put in the energy to unconfuse myself. Like I'm like, I don't really want to like dig deep into like, okay, so if gold comes in and then silver does this, then what happens to price? Like all the little nuances, I'm just like not too interested in. So most of the text, I'm just like, do. Or he's saying things that are like so obvious. I feel like there's something I'm not getting. Like he's like, every time someone buys something, someone else is selling something. I'm like, this man.
No, but if you mention the C's and M's, and the C to the M is the same as the M. Like the C M means an MC.
Yeah, so all that stuff I'm usually just like what? But every once in a while in this chapter, there's little sentences that just like freaking explode my brain. And in this one, it was on page 230. It's like one sentence at the top where he's just like, thus the social power becomes a private power of private persons. And in social power, he's talking about money. This is a section where he's talking about hoarding. And just that concept that first just framing like, you know, we've done all this work. And when he says something like money is a social power, you know, it's this thing that has like all of this human labor and existence and life congealed in it, that we've created this society where like private motherfuckers can just hoard that shit and own that shit and use it privately for their own self-interest. Like literally the power of our society just like congealed into this. Oh, we're reading the Penguin Classics version. Yeah.
But I
don't know.
also linked a PDF in the emails if you want to access one.
Hell yeah. Thank you. Anyways, that section just like that shit gets me hyped. Whenever just those little moments of clarity where it's all like kind of like Zach was saying, it's like this whole language that you don't really understand, but these little moments where you just like snap out and you see like how using these terms you can get this like totally different vision of the world from just like, oh yeah, certain people have money, to like, no, this is social power that private people have. That shit gets me hyped. And then yeah, the confusions that I have are just like things that I'm not super interested in, like just like the little nuances of how exactly money circulates and how like different factors that go into that circulation, how they're related, so that if like the price of one thing goes up, but the value of the commodity does this, and the value of the gold does this, like what will happen to the price? Like those things just remind me of like my economics 101 class in college. And I'm just like, this is exactly the type of thinking that I like deeply do not want to do. And I'm like fucking resistant to. But I'm really excited to go through everyone's confusions. I have a list. So cool. Thank you everyone for sharing. I'll read the list of questions, and then if everyone has more questions they want to add, we can do that. And then we'll jump into the review part. That sound good? Cool. Can people, what's the audio like? Is it just super quiet?
It's just really quiet. Do you have another mic?
We have like a deficiency of like good computers at this house. This is the only one who's like camera and microphone work. So we could have better audio, but then no visuals.
I think better audio would be preferable
Cool.
to video.
Computer then. All right, in the meantime, I'll just give you guys a view of my forehead while I talk. So questions that people raised was Chris wanted to go through the contradictions. Brian wanted to have a thrilling conversation about the commodity fetish, this endlessly complicated topic. Raviv was confused if commodities are unique to capitalist social relations. Zach was like, what are these words? And wanting to break them down. Lena wanted to see how all of this theory translates into the modern era. Raymond wants to talk about if you can have prices without values and like breaking apart those distinctions. and the relation of commodities to symbols. Were there any other questions that people wanted to throw on this list that we can get through?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could explore like what I meant about like the specificity of commodities to capitalism. Okay, well,
Sorry.
okay. Yeah, but I also, those are really good discussion points either way. So I think also it would be worth going over the distinction between value and price, because I think that's like something that's really easy to get tripped up on when you're like conceptualizing this stuff. Are you drawing Garfield?
Cool. Distinction between value and price. Got that written down. Value and price. All right. Do people feel good moving on to a little 15-minute recap of chapter 1?
Sure.
Sweet. So I think the big, can people hear me? Is the audio like better? We're chilling now.
Audio is really good now.
Okay, I'll stop yelling then, which is nice. I'm like a little sweaty because it's hot, and there's something about being sweaty and yelling. I was just like, this is not a good feeling. But I think the big ideas to get out of chapter 1 are just walking away with like working definitions, and there's always going to be more nuances, but like at least like grasps of value, use value, exchange value. And I think this would be a good point to talk about fetish, because this is where it first comes up. And then I think that would be, the concept of fetishism is one that would be a good segue into his discussion of money, which is chapters 2 and 3. So I kind of thought we would go through things in that order. So does anyone want to throw out a just gut reaction to like, from when you read the text, what did you get were like use value and exchange value?
Use value is how much it has to an individual person, right? Or a group of people or something. And then exchange value would just be the price it's actually traded for, right?
And then there's a wrinkle, isn't there, in the exchange value and price thing? Because like it seems like exchange value kind of sets a baseline around which like prices circulate or something like this. Prices can be distinct. They're subject to supply and demand. They're like he calls it like a sort of like circulating simple average. So there's a wrinkle in the.
I think the way I kind of conceptualize this whole thing is like, what he's really doing is he's looking at these things called commodities. And I think that what's funny about his way of writing is he really tries to characterize them as like, they're so like obvious and in front of us all the time, but they're also so mysterious and weird and hard to like define. And so like, for me, what the way use value and exchange value come out is he goes like, okay, like what exactly are what makes a commodity, right? First of all, it has to satisfy a want, but also there's the fact that it can be exchanged for other commodities, right? And the extent to which it satisfies a want is dependent on material properties of the object, right? Like its chemical makeup, like its size and shape, how it was made, that kind of thing. Those are all like inherent to the physical properties of the object, the commodity, right? And that's what makes it use value. Like when he says use value, I think he's like, it's synonymous with like literally the physical properties of the commodity, which we make use of insofar as those physical properties are useful to us. But then he's like, but say we exchange some of commodity A for some of commodity B, which means that they're equivalent in some way. And so he starts asking, like, what is there to be equivalent about these things? And if it's true that commodities just have a use value as this physical property, then how does it make sense for two commodities that have nothing to do with each other physically to be equated in that way? Or in the abstract, if commodities can be so varied and like different, what is there for us to like be able to say that we can exchange two things? And so like the way exchange value takes on a form is exactly in like that process of trade, where like I think later on he talks about like the something like the relative value, where like we hold one commodity as being a marker of value and use it to express the value of another commodity. But you could never express the value of one commodity in itself. Like he says, like saying 20 yards of linen is equal to the value of 20 yards of linen says nothing about value. Like value is only defined relative to other things, which is why it's such a difficult concept, because anytime it appears to us as like money or as like quantity in another commodity, what's actually it appears as that, but it's actually expressing like something about labor time, right? So like I think that like when you say something like the exchange value is like the price that you exchange something for, that's true, but it's like it's also appears as price because it's impossible to express like labor time otherwise. What he's saying is that labor time is the constant that allows you to make that exchange, I think.
I think when I think of exchange value, I think I kind of have to like walk there to get there. So I'm like, okay, there's a phone. It is, that's actually not a good example. There's a book, and that is a thing. It is a product. It has a value. It is useful, which gives it use value. It in itself has use value already. There's been labor that's put into it to write it, to make its little pages, to give it a cute little cover. But it has exchange value when it can be exchanged. So it's like this like coding that exists to carry use value. So like exchange value is like this weird vessel descriptor modifier thing for this book being able to be traded with a banana. So I think my definition is like an exchange value is like, yeah, I guess like a code descriptor, like a modifier of a process, or no, not a process, of a unique moment where this use value thing is also now a commodity. So exchange value as just like a moment versus a thing inherent to the book. Like the inherent book thing is use value. That's what I think about it as. That's all I got.
No, yeah, that was super clarifying. Yeah. How do folks feel about that? Do you feel like use value and exchange value, use value as this thing that's a material thing, and exchange value as a moment in the life of an object where it becomes a commodity, where this value that's inherent in all of them gets manifest, it puts a coat on and says, oh, I can be exchanged with other things because I have this value coat that I'm wearing. Does that feel good to people, or does any other like questions come up? Or other definitions where you're like, no, I totally disagree.
Can I say one more thing? I totally agree with everything you just said, by the way. I like the code analogy a lot. I think like one thing that's interesting to track also is because both use value and exchange value, both use value and value are tied to labor. I think it's interesting to track like what happens to our idea of labor as a consequence of what we're doing with the definitions of value. Like we talked about this a little bit last time, but like how like so when you so he says like labor creates use value, right? And insofar as it's useful labor, like you're literally, you know, like the use value of a coat has to do with like how thick it is or like the sewing of the fabrics, that kind of thing. So like literally your physical activity went into doing that. And because each commodity has a different use value, that means that like useful labor has to take on like a myriad of different forms that are very specific, right? So like to make a specific commodity, you need to do a very specific job. And insofar as use values are very different from each other between commodities, like commodities are not used for the same thing at all. Labor in that sense is like very diverse and like almost like it seems almost impossible that you'd be able to consider it under one heading as labor until you get to exchange value. And when you're doing exchange value or like value, suddenly what matters is not the qualitative aspects of your labor. Like it's not like what you're doing to create use value, but suddenly it's the quantity of your labor, right? So one thing I think about it is like use value comes from the quality of your labor versus value comes from the quantity of your labor. So and what that does is it means that you have to define labor in the abstract and relegate like the entire phenomenon of productive human activity to one like social substance, I think is the word he uses. A social substance that can be like divided into time chunks and like used to calculate value, basically.
I want to jump in. We have 3-ish minutes left on the recap section, which once the time runs out, we can vote to like keep it going or whatever. But does anyone want to throw out a definition of value? Hopefully this one, I think, will be a little quicker, and then we can jump into commodity fetish for like 30 seconds. Raymond's got us.
Okay, hey guys. So drawing mainly from that part that I had a question about, that was like, oh, like something can have a price but not value. And then it was like, well, the reason that is because the land is for sale, but like no one's worked on it. So then from that, I'm like, okay, so then value is like what congealed labor time, or just human labor. Yeah, so that is like my working definition of value.
That is fucking perfect. I think the one piece that is like nice to add to that is that it is a way of thinking about value that's like, oh, it's just like the amount of time you put into something. And this is something Raviv was mentioning earlier. It both needs to be useful labor, i.e. like labor that produces something that's useful to someone else. If I spend a year working on a piece of art that just is shit and no one likes, or it doesn't fill any human need, that was not useful labor. It has no value. That's one important thing to point out. And the other is it's the amount of time that in your society is generally put into that object. So say you live in a society where like Raymond's making samosas right now, right? So if we lived in a society that we have like just samosa making machines that can make them in 30 seconds,
but Raymond, you know, uses an act of love. He puts a lot of care and time into it. It takes him like, I don't know, 3 minutes to make a samosa.
30 seconds.
The value at which he can sell his samosas is still going to be contingent on like the society that he lives in, the value that is expected that he put into that samosa, not just, and obviously there's distinctions where he could go to like a organic farmer's market and be like, actually, it's a great thing. I spent a lot of time on this. You should pay me more because of it. But how does that feel for people?
I think about this whenever I'm at my bodega, actually, because they're extremely slow at making sandwiches, and I take some pride that they definitely like, they just haven't modernized. You know, they're still making sandwiches at the rate they'd make them in like 1600 or something like that, and it's kind of like, you know, power to them. Anyway. But then there's this other bodega nearby that has this like fancy new smoothie machine that can make them in like 10 seconds or something like this.
Yeah, it has so much to do with like the productivity that it's being produced at, you know, and like if you can have something that's like slowly made, it like can taste like shit, you know, but like really fancy wine is like just takes like 15 years or whatever, you know, even though it might not even taste that good. Yeah.
So, oh, go for it, Chris.
Oh, so I just wanted to think out loud. So, value is generally about the socially necessary labor time stuff.
Yes.
But once you get into like different types of like power relations or just like different groups that value different things, then it's like socially necessary labor time is like relative because like within the particular, I'm just
You're talking about the
like,
organic
yeah,
American thing where like certain
Yeah.
people can value. Yeah, this
Then
is
it's
something.
like
No, go ahead. You're
Go ahead.
finishing.
this is, it's like the same thing, like it carries a socially necessary labor time, but it still has like that kind of like contradiction between social, like the socially necessary like sandwich 30 seconds versus sandwich 3 minutes. Like because it takes longer, then it's more like valuable
This
in
is-
that particular group.
I remember when I first read this, I was working at a little diversified organic vegetable farm, and I remember thinking like, are we selling our produce for a higher price because it took us like there's more labor in every carrot at a small farm than like at a massive farm? Like, is that what is causing this price to go up? And that's like, you know, a really complicated relationship from value to price already. Or is it that there's this like sub market within the larger market where the socially necessary labor time is considered differently than in like the larger agricultural world? I don't know if other people have thoughts on this.
Because I would see it as more like, because I don't think it's like if you're just an individual maker and you make something slower, it's not like it's more valuable because you made it slower. I think it's more so that right within a given society, like let's say you're in a feudal society, it takes you like a day to make a coat, right? Somebody comes in, is super fast at making coats because I don't know, they've like managed to make it with like 4 people or something, and they can make like 4 coats in a day. Well, at first they're going to be able to just like sell those same coats at basically the same price as everybody else in society, even though they're making 4 of them a day. But if other people get privy to this and speed up their process too, so that everybody's making 4 coats a day, like each of those coats is going to be a little bit less valuable, right? Because now it's like you can make a coat in 4 hours instead of 24 hours, not on an individual level, but on like a societal level, right? And so I think the idea there is that like, I mean, and so like when I see something that's like yeah, like I was giving obnoxious example, but like let's say yeah, like I get like my artisan cheese that's aged like 15 years or something like that. Like for me, that's actually part of why Marx wants to distinguish like price from just like exchange value, right? Because like there's something might have like a shit ton of demand because it's like artisan, local homegrown, and so like like then people will just pay a bunch of money, but that's not because of the exchange value is different or something like that. That's just like the price, right? like the exchange value might be the same as something else, but it might be the sort of good that just happens to be like a luxury good, you know. Another example like this that's a good one, because it's just like pure price pretty much, is like, you know, a baseball player hits like a home run and then like signs it for you or something like that, right? That ball could be worth like $1 million or something like this, which is so different from what it's like exchange value would be if you looked at like, you know, the amount of time that was necessary in society at a time to like make a baseball or something like this. So anyway, yeah.
One thing I was gonna say is I think in the case Rojas was talking about, where you have like an organic carrot that took a little longer to make than like a normal carrot, I would actually say that you're producing like a different commodity than people who are making like non-organic carrots. Like I think like inherent in the process, like the fact is that there's a different process that you use that produces a different use value, and that people are like if you could, for instance, make organic carrots, I don't know what makes a carrot organic actually, but like suppose like it's a different commodity, right? And if you like, it's fine that people who make regular ass carrots can do it way faster than you, because the people who are buying organic carrots are buying organic carrots. They want it because it's organic, not because it's like for them, like it's a different commodity. Like if you're like I don't know, like a rich white person at a farmer's market or something, you know? And like, I think, but if you were able to somehow like produce organic carrots way faster than everyone and they were still organic, then that would change the socially necessary labor time to produce an organic carrot. But I think like, to me, like maybe it's you would count as a different commodity or something. But the more that I'm thinking about it now, I realize that like if we're defining different commodities based on like distinctions in use value, like that can be like a very hard thing to define rigorously. And like each carrot is different, you know, like, and has different use value because of that. So I don't know. I guess these things are just abstractions, but I was just kind of thinking about it.
I know we have to move on. Okay. I just wanted to so I was doing research on like Roman and Roman stuff, where like I was thinking about like the social life of a particular rock, and how it was its value depended on its rarity. And I think I just want to like pinpoint rarity as the thing that we're talking about here, because I don't know, I was reading the part, I think it's on 215. The thing that I got, there's like, it's like a huge paragraph, but what I got from it was that price depends on the total amount of commodities found in circulation, like, which is like rarity. And so, but then later it talks about how price, like the economy has a lot to do with it, and how if there's like, if there's a financial crash, then the amount of money, like, which is also a commodity, is in lack. And then you can't even buy the commodities, which are just sitting there. And then there's like, you know what I mean? So then you can't exchange. So there's like, there can be rarity in money or in the product, the commodity you're trying to buy, which I think 2015, page 215 summarizes pretty well. Yeah.
Thanks, Lena. I have a proposition to transition to fetish, but oh, hey, what's up, Zach? Welcome back. So I was thinking of transitioning to fetish, but in a way that also jumps us ahead to talking about chapters 2 and 3 at the same time. So there's like a long quote on page 187 that kind of links the idea of commodity fetish with the money fetish, and also kind of summarizes chapter 2. So I don't know if we wanted to either read it out loud, popcorn style, or read it in our heads and then come back and discuss it. How do people feel about that?
Like out loud.
Yeah, me too. I like out loud.
Cool.
Is that everybody?
We'll do it out loud.
Everybody wants to read out loud?
Out loud.
Yeah.
So it's on the Penguins version, page 187. Other versions, the chapter right before chapter 3, or the paragraph right before chapter 3. So the last paragraph of chapter 2. If everyone could just flash a thumbs up once they have it in front of them.
You said 187 in Penguin?
187 in Penguin, yeah. Cool, Brian's good. Zach, are you looking for it?
Yeah. Okay.
So cute. They're just really sleepy. They're so nice.
It starts, we have already seen from the simplest expression. Or maybe I could take a picture of it and put it in.
Yeah.
But we have seen that with every advance in the use of machinery, or is that something else?
We have already seen from the simplest expression of value X commodity A equals Y commodity B.
I think you're at a later part where it talks about machines.
Okay.
It's if you find chapter 3 and then scroll back one page, it'll be right.
Okay.
Y'all want to see our cat?
Yeah.
Looking super cute. EJ chilling with us.
Okay. I think I'm on it.
Nice. Do you want to start off reading it and then just popcorn at a random number of sentences? Zach?
Sure. So starting from the page before chapter 3, chapter 2, last page, right? I'm looking at the
Just
PDF
the
right
last,
now.
just
Okay.
the last paragraph of chapter 2.
Okay. The learned Professor Roscher, after is that the wrong thing? This is a PDF she linked in the
Oh, but it's not going to be the same page. I think.
oh, this is chapter 2, I think.
It's the last page of chapter 2, or the last paragraph of chapter 2.
Am I in volume 2 or something? I'm so confused. Okay, someone else start this.
Oh, you're reading a footnote, Zach.
Oh, that's a footnote. Oh, yeah, okay.
So I think you got to go a little further up. Go find it.
Okay.
Wait, isn't this a volume 2 reading group?
Yo!
Shit.
You are at the right place because 13, that's
Yeah.
footnote 13, but yeah.
Okay, it's just a massive footnote. Okay, I see
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Here it is. We have already seen from the most elementary expression of value, X commodity A equals Y commodity B, that the object in which the magnitude of the value of another object is represented appears to have the equivalent form independently of this relation as a social property given to it by nature. Popcorn, Raymond.
We followed the process by which this false semblance became firmly established, process which was completed when the universal equivalent form became identified with the natural form of a particular commodity, and thus crystallized into the money form. Popcorn Gray.
What appears to happen is not that a particular commodity becomes money because all other commodities express their values in it, but on the contrary, that all other commodities universally express their values in a particular commodity because it is money. Popcorn Lena.
The movement through which this process has been mediated vanishes in its own result, leaving no trace behind. Without any initiative on their part, the commodities find their own value configuration ready to hand in the form of a physical commodity existing outside but also alongside them. Popcorn, Brian.
These objects, gold and silver, just as they come out of the bowels of the earth, are forthwith the direct incarnation of all human labor. Hence the magic of money. Popcorn Chris.
Men are henceforth related to each other in their social process production in a purely atomistic way. Their own relations of production, therefore, assume a material shape which is independent of their control and their conscious individual action. This situation is manifested first by the fact that the products of men's labor universally take on the form of commodities. The riddle of the money fetish is therefore the riddle of the commodity fetish, now become visible and dazzling to our eyes.
Ooh. Cool. So yeah, I thought that section was like a nice summary of the work he's done so far to build up what the money form is, how it came about, and how it like deeply transforms all our social relations, and then ultimately is like a nice link from the commodity fetish to the money fetish. So as we read that, were there things that people wanted to point out that were like, oh yeah, that clicked, or parts that were like, what? I thought this was going a different direction. What did he say?
One thing I think really resonates in this paragraph that I think I've noticed overall is that like one of the things that Marx is saying characterizes capitalism is the fact that like the most fundamental relationships and categories of capitalism are also the most like obscured and like not intuitive or not appearing as they actually are. I read a secondary text on Marx one time by this Japanese theorist named Samezo Kuruma, and he says something like, in like bourgeois economics, like the project is like you look at like the face of a clock and just kind of like track the way it moves, but like what is actually happening is underneath the clock and like in the gears and stuff, and that's what kind of Marx is like more interested in. But yeah, I think it's kind of a bizarre like thing to think about, like none of this stuff is obvious, like obviously like we had to like work very hard to read Marx to understand it, and like Marx had to work very hard to like come to a reasoning about it. But that's like the most basic relationships of our social structure are like completely obscured and not obvious at all. But and like things like appear as completely natural when they're like totally not. I think that's like a really interesting way to characterize capitalism.
I wanted to, oh, is it okay if I go? Raymond was gonna go. I can feel it, yeah.
What I was gonna say before Review said his bit was what is the riddle? Like when he's like, oh, it's the riddle of commodity fetishes, the riddle of money fetishism. Then I guess like the I guess what Review was saying with like, oh, like it's like not obvious how like why money has value, for example, or like why just like the whole thing of like why you can trade a coat for like a bunch of linen. And so I guess that's the riddle, but I just wanted to clarify. Because I guess because that's a riddle, but I don't know if that's the riddle of the fetishism, the commodity fetishism.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? What is the riddle?
I think the riddle is like how money happens. Like, how did we get from a commodity to money?
Yeah, I agree.
I also wanted to, I think it's like his language here is just so amazing to me, like so goddamn poetic, because like it's like poetry. It's crazy. There's like because earlier he was talking about the Enlightenment. I was trying to find what page. But he talks about how the Enlightenment was a movement to remove the strangeness and the appearance of strangeness for mysteries that we cannot decipher. So it's like eradicating religion. Like, it's not God that's the source of this. Like, let's understand the scientific basis of what this phenomenon is. And so he's using that, like, money is God, you know? Like, so the riddle of trying to decipher the strangeness of this process, like, he talks about it similarly. Like, he says it's like a crude state that emerges from the bowels of the earth, and it's like an incarnation, and then there's like metamorphosis and chrysalis, and there's also this like social ecology like language there, and then it's like the magic of money and like atomistic, like there's just like a macro microcosm thing going on here that I really like.
So maybe I'll make a grumpy point here, because like some of the so the things that you're just hitting on, like I think you're totally part of the concept of fetishism, but are also part of why I hate the concept of fetishism, and why if I was like a stupid, like if I was like some advertising group like asked me to sit and they're like reading, like let's say like Capital is written today, and I had to like read through it as part of like a group of like 10 people to market to different demographics, and they like asked like what was good about it and what was bad about it, I would tell them to like kind of cut the fetishism concept crap, for kind of this exact reason. Because so I think that the sort of, yeah, it seems like the fetish image is about kind of like making this analogy between how we ought to think about money and how Marx clearly already thinks about God. Because like the idea here is that like, yeah, God seems to be this this like stirrer of movement, this thing that makes stuff happen. But in fact, like God, if you're Marx, is like a sort of like product of like human imagination, human work, like what humans do with one another, and kind of that those sort of social relations among humans are expressed by God or something like this. But so then so like the movement there is that there's this thing God, kind of an illusion, appearance, fake, and then there's the real thing, which is like sort of social relations among humans. So I think that works in the God case, but I think like in the commodity case, it would just make things more obscure, because or in the money case, it would just make things more obscure, because if the same thing's going on in the money case, then you're in the situation where the fake thing is money, and then the real thing is like human labor or something like this. But it seems to be that this couldn't be Marx's point, because it seems like what's going to go on over the course of the book is he's going to show how like this thing, labor power, that is clearly part of the history, like how value is calculated within the history of capitalism, isn't like an innate or natural thing. It's like something that has to be fabricated and forged, and it takes like hundreds of years of sort of brutal violence to put people in the position where they're willing to sell themselves as labor power. So this is kind of why that's why I always get confused by the fetishism thing, because it's just like the argument doesn't track to me. Like Marx's argument in the book doesn't seem to be like money doesn't rule humans, humans make money. You know, if that was the big conclusion, that like like humans are the source of value in capitalism or something like this, then it would basically just be a book that's kind of like, well, like I've been like the sort of upshot that's going to become like increasingly clear that what this book is it's a critique of the way in which workers over hundreds and hundreds of year period have been put in a position where they're forced under the guise of freedom to sell their labor at extremely exploitative rates. That point would just kind of get lost or like muddled. So anyway, this is my like, you know, I don't know, like letter to whoever published Capital in the first place, that they need to like cut this stuff, because it's just like confusing and unhelpful. Very like, yeah.
Does the fact that this chapter begin with the bearers of money, or like the guardians, or whatever language it uses, like the fact that it's the arbiters or the gods of money as like the value form or whatever, does that change anything?
Oh, yeah, wait, what would the change be? That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. I think I want to revise, I guess, that money, it's not money that's the god, but it's the accumulators of it that are.
Mm.
I want to touch on something that Brian mentioned about like how kind of like the point of this book is to show that like it took a lot of like violence and a lot of like coercion to get to the way capital works today. And I think this is a really powerful tool in the sense that I think a lot of people who defend capitalism do it from the standpoint of like, oh, well, capitalism arises due to like some kind of natural phenomenon, like competition, or like scarcity of resources, or like they'll make some appeal to like behavioralism or even something like that. And I think the reason this is such a powerful book is because it's like, and conversely, people will critique like communist projects on the grounds of them being like Promethean, or saying like it's naive to think that humans could just like completely remake the world in defiance of what they see as like natural laws or ways of being. But I think what Marx is saying here is that like, no, like in fact, capitalism was an example of people just completely remaking the world in a specific social relationship that's not at all natural or derivable from like first principles or anything like that. Like, so he's saying not only, I think the double-edged sword here is that if you accept that, what that means is not only that things don't have to be the way they are now, like nothing is natural or like just organically came about spontaneously about capitalism. And then on the other hand, that also means we have the power to like completely reshape our world if we want to. Because, you know, and we can do that in a more rationalistic or more sensible way.
Brian, I really loved your point earlier. Can I try to defend fetish though? A counter,
Totally.
a letter to the editor that is, no, this part's lit and we should keep it. Let me think how to start. I think for me, I do really like the point you make that like if the commodity fetish is like the central point, you walk away from this book saying, we live in a society that seems to be ruled by commodities. No, it's actually like land and labor that run this world. Nice. And then, yeah, you lose the central point of like, or maybe just more politically important point of like, what is the forms and the logics of the society we've created where through force, people have been forced to sell themselves to live. I think that I think my one defense would just be it's like a and instead of a but. And that to me, the really exciting moment I feel when I first read chapter 1 of Capital is that moment where he unpacks the commodity fetish and all of a sudden I'm thrown into this world kind of for the first time where I like think this way or see this way, where when I go to the grocery store, I really start to like feel in my body and like see the depths of like the alienation of our society. Wait, I want to read this comment.
Oh, finish your thing out though. I want to finish your thing out. Sorry, I was also listening.
What the fuck? Just something about like for the first time being thrown into a world where like you see the alienation, you see how far you are from a world where you have any sort of a vision of your social relations, any sort of a vision of like the shit you take to keep yourself alive, like the worlds it comes from are just like a mystery to you. And I think while not ultimately like maybe the most world-changing project of the book, is still just like good shit. Yeah, that's my defense of the fetish.
I do like the sense that the fetish does feel like you're kind of trapped in this world of appearances, and it almost does feel like it feels like Star Trek to me or something like this, you know, where you're not quite sure what's real and what's there's appearance upon appearance, alienation upon alienation.
Yeah, it seems like his musings on the symbol are like talk about that a lot, which were like they were in these like 2 footnotes. I don't know. So yeah, capitalists are, I just want to like talk about your capitalists are also ruled by money. And so they're beholden to the money and the servants to the market. Because they're the hoarders or whatever.
I'm looking at time and I was wondering, we have like 30-ish minutes left. I was wondering if I think a cool thing to transition into would be maybe the project that Chris had laid out for us earlier of like slowly walking through the like escalating contradictions of like, okay, there's a commodity, you break it up into use value, exchange value, you can break it up into like the money form and like all of these contradictions that he's slowly trying to like put together and build together into like this huge contradiction of how, what's up?
What, sorry? Contradiction of how?
Brian's out. Oh, rip. Damn. I'm sad.
What?
Yeah, he had to go on a hike. But yeah, how does that sound to people? Like slowly walking through the contradictions and trying to get a sense of like, how does the crisis of our society boil down into like this weird split between use value and value?
Cool.
Or is there other stuff people want to talk about? This is also like,
I think that'll touch on like a lot of parts of the chapter.
Sounds fun.
Yay.
I don't know if you want to flip to 209. Is that right? Or is that what no, okay, yeah, that's something else. Cool. Yeah, page 209, which is if you're reading a PDF.
For the circulation of money.
There's a subsection in chapter 3 with the letter B, the circulation of money. It's a section right before that, or conversely, the last section. The last section of part 2 of chapter 3, and then subsection A, the metamorphosis of commodities. 209. Let me know if you need more hints, Zach.
It starts with
Wait, could you repeat the page number?
209.
Oh, the thing. Okay. That melon looks dank.
Use value.
Okay, chapter 3, section A.
Chapter 3, section A, the last paragraph.
Okay. Okay, found it.
Over here. So towards the end of that paragraph. Sorry, let me finish chewing. And we can maybe start earlier if this doesn't click, but there's a sentence that starts, there is an antithesis imminent in the commodity between use value and value. I thought we could start there and just read like the 3 sentences to the end. And then just walk like sentence by sentence, like what does this mean? What does this mean? And like build the argument ourselves. Does anyone want to start reading that, or is anyone confused as to where we're starting? Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Just like thumbs up if you found it. We got Gray, we got Lena. Zach is figuring it out.
Wait, try doing Control F and just putting in, what was it? Would it be? It would be
An antithesis.
there is an
Yeah.
antithesis.
Okay. I think it's a different translation.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
You're reading different words.
Okay. So it starts with hoarding serves various purposes for me. Which sentence is it in the paragraph?
There is an antithesis. Let me put it in the chat because I think most of your words are the same. There is an antithesis in the commodity.
That's not, I think that'll be. So Chris just sent the first sentence that we're talking about.
Okay.
I think you got it.
It's one of these sentences, so I'll find out which one. When-
We can also, it's not too long. We could just read it and then hopefully
Yeah, okay.
not the right place. It'll just, still make sense. Raymond wants to read it. Just read all of it.
Okay. Tell me when to stop.
At the end.
Okay, cool. There is an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particular concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as merely abstract universal labor, between the conversion of things to persons and the conversion of persons to things, of things in the antithetical phases of the metamorphosis of the commodity are the developed forms of motion in this immanent contradiction. These forms therefore imply the possibility of crises, though no more than the possibility. For the development of this possibility into a reality, a whole series of conditions is required, which do not yet even exist from the standpoint of the simple circulation of commodities. Cool.
So yeah, I thought we could go literally like sentence by sentence and just try to reframe it in our own words. So there's an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value. What does this mean to folks?
To me, so the antithesis between use value and value is right. Is like this object is just like, are you going to use it, or are you going to trade it for something else? Like the value is like this. Because what would you say earlier? Value is just like congealed labor time, and then you could get other congealed labor time with it. So it's like the object. Yeah, is the object going to be used, or is it going to be traded for something else? Yeah.
For me, I like if we're thinking about land, which would have use value but no value, or something, like I think that the contradiction is that like there doesn't necessarily have to be exchange in this contradiction. Like neither, right? Do either imply an exchange?
There might be an argument for value requiring exchange, because for value to be created, you have to be like usefully laboring in it, and use is defined like socially. I don't know if a value exists in the Robinson Crusoe example. I don't know.
I would say that value requires to be expressed. It requires some kind of exchange. Because remember, because value is not really a physical thing, it's like an abstraction on human labor time. The only way it can be given form is through a social relationship as well. So that's why every time you talk about value, it has to be in that like X a commodity equals Y be a commodity. And that's like the exchange form of the value. So like value like never appears as such, but is always taking on different forms that are mediated by a social relationship. So like conversely, use value can be considered in itself because it's just a physical thing. But because exchange value, or because value is kind of this just like weird social construction, it doesn't have a physical form outside of a social relationship. But that doesn't mean it's equivalent to a social relationship. It's just, it needs a social relationship to take like a measurable form, I think. That was my reading of it.
So the contradiction is that that you don't, yeah, sorry, never mind.
So the land. So the contradiction is, it is a thing that is useful, but it can only be seen as useful if because
I think we're off track because he's talking about commodities here.
Yeah.
And in the land example, we're talking about land that has not been turned into a commodity.
Right. I also think that
like a phone, we might get a little closer to the contradiction.
So a phone is a useful thing, has use value. The contradiction between use value and, give me a second.
I think like last week I was talking about how somebody said that there's a dialectic between use value and value. And I think that maybe that's what we should pinpoint, that like, because in my head I'm like, okay, so the use value actually has nothing to do with it's like in the Robinson Crusoe example where he's like cataloging everything that he has that is useful to him, like all of the tools. There's no exchange value because he's stranded on an island. There's nobody to exchange it with.
Yeah.
But value is all about exchange. So if you have an object and I'm not going to use this pen, but I'll keep it just in case, like the use is suddenly about its value, its exchange value. You know what I mean? And even though it doesn't have to necessarily have use to me.
Oh, which is where the hoarding thing comes.
Yeah.
Lena's cracked the code.
Okay.
I think also the reason it's confusing to us to think of the value of a commodity as separate to its use is because we're not really wealthy enough, I don't think either of us, to really be like accumulating commodities in a way where we're like, this is useful as an exchange thing. But to capitalists, I mean, this is most of what they use commodities for. Like if you own like 10,000 barrels of oil, like you're not thinking of that as its use. So I think like if you're just walking around like your bedroom and you're like, what's the exchange value of this lamp? The reason it feels such a weird thing to think about is because it doesn't really matter to us. Like we're not like the capitalists who are really making big moves with commodities and stuff. That was just a thought I had. The other thing I was going to say is like one contradiction that arises is like, actually, I'm not 100% sure if this is what he was saying. So like if this sounds like incorrect, or like, I think it's definitely more nuanced than what I'm about to say. But it seems like one thing he was alluding to is how by splitting use value and exchange value, which seems necessary to get a grip on what's happening, but once you do that, it seems that somehow it becomes possible that generating more use value can lead to less overall value of the labor. Like they kind of can move in opposite directions.
Wait, could you repeat that?
Yeah, like for instance, like how, for instance, an increase in production of a certain commodity makes it less valuable, when if you're thinking about use value, it's obviously more valuable because you just have more of the stuff. So I think that's one real contradiction where you're like, okay, like it should be actually that we have more value now that we have more coats, but because our value is socially mediated as opposed to like based on anything real, what actually happens is, okay, well, now we have more coats, which means they are all worth less. Like that, I think, is a contradiction in the goals of production. Like, because if the goal of production is to produce value and not a use value, then our production inherently is not utilitarian and based on something not even real. Like, and I think that's a really powerful critique, right? Because like, if we were producing specifically for utility, then we wouldn't run into those kinds of problems. But because we're producing for the sake of value and not use value, there's a contradiction in like the point of production of commodities. I don't know.
That was really good. That was really good. That
Thank you,
helps a lot.
Brian. Thank you so much.
That was reviewed, but yes.
Oh, sorry. Review.
I think we can add then the next part. There's an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor. Do you folks want to break that down? Or does it feel like we kind of like crack the use value private versus social labor? But I don't know if someone wants to take a stab at unpacking.
I can try.
Go for it.
Private labor manifests itself as social labor, meaning the labor that goes into making something or doing something has is happening and has like the guiding force of like knowing it can be commodified, and that like maybe no, it's fine. And that like motivation slash let me restart. Okay. Private labor, okay. You're putting labor into something to make a thing. That thing, when it becomes a commodity, is social, because later it will be like relational to other congealed labor things. So it's private, but it's social when you think about like, why am I laboring, or like, yeah.
Yeah, for me, the thing that helps is like putting it as like use value and value. Private labor produces use value, like the specific craft you do is what's gonna like
And then value is
the weaving, but then value is gonna be you know, like socially necessary labor time, which is like meaningless. Like, what the fuck does that mean? So like that doesn't exist. That isn't a real thing versus like you hitting something with a hammer. And so like the work you do, all the labor you've ever done in your life is both you literally in that bakery making that shit and also this weird quantified socially necessary labor time that is like turned into a wage or like a valuation of that commodity you're producing.
That was a good thing.
How are folks feeling? And it looks like you maybe had a point, or that was a hand flourish.
I was wondering if you could summarize it again.
antithesis between use value and value, between private labor, which also has to be social. Private labor is like anytime anyone labors, they're laboring as a private person, like the literal material thing you are doing. You are making that coat, you're a tailor. At the same time that you're doing that private labor, our society is also considering that through a social lens of you are creating value. And that value is created through your like socially necessary labor time of that private labor as a tiny part of a larger society. And so when you're laboring as a private person and as a participant of a society. And one is producing use value. Your private labor produces use value, like the literal material shit, the coat you're making that someone can wear later. But you're also producing value, a thing that will later be traded in a market outside of your control, in like a social way. I don't know if that was too many words to summarize, but
That was really good, I thought.
Yeah.
I was also thinking maybe this probably ties into why Marx thinks of labor as so alienating in capitalism, because it's like even as you're doing it, it's like not really about what you're doing. Like it's like what you're doing is totally separate from yourself. And like yeah, there was an interesting line somewhere. I don't have my edition in front of me, so I can't like find any of the things that I'm talking about, but I'm pretty sure he says something about like how people have always made clothes, but not people have not always been tailors for some reason. And I think what he's getting at there is that like actually, I don't really know what I'm saying. Sorry, I don't think I'm saying anything.
Oh no, that was like, because it's also like the division of labor has become clarified throughout.
Yeah, and that's another contradiction, right? Because in dividing labor, like you're getting separate utilities out of it, but it also requires you to conceive of it as a unit at the same time, right? Because I wish I had my book in front of me. Isn't there a part about like, hold on, I'm gonna find the division of labor part.
I'm like, I'm like thinking about how I'm wondering if all processes of metamorphosis in capitalism are contradictions.
Put that one more time, or like
Say it again.
and then say more
Say it
too.
again.
Okay, is every metamorphosis in capitalism, so like commodity to money or money to commodity, that CMC format that it talks about a lot, is that always inherently a contradiction?
Yes, I think the point he is making is that these contradictions are talking about between use value and value, private labor and social labor, when the way they like, instead of just exploding, the way they like relieve their own tension or whatever the fuck is they go into a market. And when you go into a market, one person is entering that market with a commodity, another person has money. So one person has a use value, private labor, another person has like value as it is manifested in our society, like pure exchange value, this like money thing. and these things that are in like total contradiction to each other metamorphose, like move and change and flow. And it's like in this flow that these like contradictions create a whole, and a whole that is moving. And it's only when like whole WHOLE, like a unit, like a buying and a selling. And it's only when, you know, he talks about like what happens when the antithesis turns into a contradiction. He's like crisis, like when there's only buying, and no one's selling, or there's only selling. Then all of a sudden these things that seem to be at ease with one another, i.e. like, oh yeah, when I go to the store, I give money, they give commodities, these things are flowing. All of a sudden the like contradictions inside of them burst out, and then we're like, holy fuck, it's 2008, the global economy is crashing, like fuck. So I think, yes, metamorphosis is a contradiction, like resolving itself.
If anyone's interested, I found the part on division of labor, and there's another really good example of contradiction here. So I can read, there's like 3 paragraphs that I think would be good. I wouldn't mind reading them if you guys want to like wait for that, or we could just talk about them.
Let's say it is 11:56. I think we have 4 more minutes. I don't know if people want to keep going, but just to time check, just how folks are feeling, what their days look like.
What page is the division of labor thing on?
It's like 132 to 133. I was gonna read like the last paragraph of 132, and then the first paragraph of 133. Oh, this is in the Penguin edition.
Okay, that sounds like a lot, like 2 paragraphs for like a couple.
Okay, that's fine.
Does anybody have any questions? I had this one other question I wanted to bring up. Okay, yes, it's pure money, this question. Is capitalism a product, is capitalism simply a product of international trade? And
I've heard a lot of interesting things about, like, what do you mean, like, as historical product of international trade?
Yeah, because it talks about like, that being the inception of it.
I've heard that, and there's a lot of different arguments about this, but I think like, one factor that I've heard, it was like the birthplace of capitalism was the Venetian like seafaring thing, or what do you go like their like whole system of like trading boats in the Mediterranean, and how there were so many wealthy Venetians, and they started to like speculate on different trading ships and like the commodities that they were bringing and stuff like that, and that was the genesis of like the modern like market capitalism or something like that. I don't know if Marx would actually agree with that though, because to him capitalism isn't just about markets and like speculation and stuff like that. But I forget where exactly I heard that, but it's a really interesting thing about just like wealthy Venetians like kind of starting everything. Also, like arguably like colonization had a big part of it, I would say.
I think that question gets really difficult, because if you look at states like Rome or ancient Greece or really ancient city states, I mean, they had like systems of proto-capitalism in a way.
But weren't they also empires that were international?
Yes, but they didn't do trading so much as just like coming in and taking all the natural resources. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question.
I really don't think, yeah, I think this is a really hard question also. Like, I think like you definitely need a lot of like historical subtleties to account for sure. And I'm not really a history person, so.
I will say that in the text itself, Marx really focuses on primitive accumulation. So like colonization and violence as the origin of capitalism, but it's more of like a specifically British history of the origin of capitalism. And it's somewhat more of like a logical argument than a historical one. And there's like, one of the things that Capital gets taken to task the most for is its like historical Eurocentrism. And it's kind of like oftentimes framing a logical, like the immersion of the money form as like a historical argument, when really it's like more complicated, and it makes sense as a logical argument of how money would come about, but it didn't always play out that way. But I'm really curious what inspired that question, Lena, and then like just to hear your thoughts on that. If people are good with time, because we are at 2 hours.
Welcome to 2 hours, boys. Let's see. Where did I get that idea? Oh, so it was in chapter 2 when he talks about nomads. Nomads are the first to develop the money form because they have to go to other places to, and so need some kind of like portable universal equivalent to obtain things. And gold is like essentialized enough for that, you know, like small enough to carry in your pocket and purchase things with it. And he calls it like spontaneous and primitive, a primitive form of manifestation. And wait, did somebody want to say something?
Only if you're done.
I really agree about the Western focus, because I was like, what nomads is he? Like, I just like wanted to know more. And then I was like thinking about the Silk Road, because I've been studying the Silk Road this like in 2021 because of my research in the Middle East and stuff. And I'm not actually sure what the medium of trade was, like what the universal equivalent was then. And so it's just got me curious about that, because it wasn't bartering, you know, like, yeah.
Just okay, so a couple things that I've read. There's a lot of like disagreement on like the origins of money, and I think it's one of the areas that Marx is taken to maybe have not been right on, because I think his ideas of the origins of money are like well informed, but like ultimately speculative, and he didn't really have like the resources of modern historians. But at the same time, like, okay, for instance, there's another guy named David Graeber who wrote a whole book on the origins of debt, and it's a really, really cool book. Actually, I haven't. Okay, actually, no, I can't talk about it. I haven't read it, but I've watched his lectures on it. It's a really cool argument. I'm not going to say it's a cool book, but basically his whole idea is that currency arose due to the advent of armies, and that medieval like militaries basically were the reason that you had to have money, because you needed suddenly like lords needed a way to compensate a massive amount of people all at once. And so, but at the same time, what would end up happening is like, because the money couldn't be exchanged for resources all at once, you needed to also keep conquering new lands, because the only way you were going to feed your army, because money, you can't eat money, right? The only way you could feed your army was to have them go pillage some other land and just like steal all their food and stuff. So it's an interesting thing, because it's like he kind of ties like money and like imperialism and militarism are kind of like experience the same genesis. But the other thing is that David Graeber means something way more general than Marx means. I would say David Graeber is more concerned with like currency, whereas for Marx, money is a very specific thing to capitalism. And like wait, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, like I think it gets confusing, because obviously people have had currency for a very long time. And but I think what Marx means by money is like very specific to capitalism also. So
I have this other very art history point, which is that I think just to like, I'm thinking a lot about like the money and God thing still, and whether money is the God or the bearers are the gods. And just the coins have always had the head of the empire on it and were used as a portable means of systematizing knowledge of the ruler of the land across the empire. And so like that's also part of the confusion. It's like, is it, you know, like they're the bearers and like physically the symbol on the coin itself. And even like American money, that's, you know, like fucking Thomas Jefferson or whatever. So that was a really cool, like the David Graeber thing is cool. What was the book called again?
it's called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. It's a really long book because it's the first 5,000 years, I guess. But he's got some like lectures on YouTube that I've watched where he kind of does an overview of the argument. But it's cool. Basically, he criticizes like the entire idea of debt, and which is debt obviously is a much more, has been around a lot longer than capitalism. So it's a really interesting like kind of fundamental critique of like yeah. He also one thing I've heard is that like one thing he talks about is how like apparently like, so Marx kind of bases a lot of his theories of money on like the idea of a barter system coming before it. And apparently like, I actually am not, I don't want to like say this like definitely, but I think like the historical consensus right now is that barter systems never actually really existed. And that it was before currency, it was more just like a kind of a community based like, oh, like you gave me like a cow last week, so I'll like give you something like like more of a kind of like a mutual aid kind of thing, as opposed to like, oh no, there's a specific exchange rate of like 6 eggs to like 1 gallon of milk or something like that. But I think this is actually in Marx's favor, because what this shows is that bourgeois historical economists could not conceive of any kind of system of like economy without this like idea of exchange value and like the idea to have some kind of equivalencies between commodities. So if anything, I think the fact that people were mistaken in formulating this idea of a barter system shows kind of that like Marx was onto something in the way that like our current society kind of distorts the way we think about these sort of things.
Yo, that
was-
just blew my mind.
That was spicy as fuck.
We don't have barter.
No bartering?
You dropped that like it was like, oh, historical consensus. I forgot. We were all like freaking out over here. We were like, what? Say what? Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. People should definitely fact check me on that, by the way. I don't even remember where I heard it.
I kind of don't want to. I'm like, I was just gonna say that from now on.
That makes sense. Like I can't think of, I don't know. It makes sense. I have read a little bit about gift economies, but they were like used in really specific examples like wampum belts or whatever, you know, like where it's this very formal and very artistic exchange, and not, well, yeah, it's not even an exchange. It's more like a diplomatic offering, you know. But the exchange, I guess, is diplomacy and cooperation. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm gonna make noises that indicate a sort of general wrapping up of the conversation. I don't exactly know the correct noises to make, but imagine I'm making those right now. I thought this was a really cool conversation. We didn't get through everything, but that was going to be kind of impossible. But if there's any lingering things in people's minds, yeah, there's a signal. Feel free to drop them in there and we can like keep the conversation going there. It's also like, I think the El Paso crew is going to dip, but if people wanted to keep talking about barter economies, like they can hang. But yeah. Oh, and then who wants to facilitate next week?
Next week, right?
What is the next one?
Oh, chapters. What are we reading next week?
Yeah, what are we reading next
4
week?
and 5?
No,
What are the titles?
they're checking.
Wow, let me double check.
Depending on the subject.
Chris is tentatively down to facilitate.
I don't know what it is.
Hell yeah, Chris,
I agree.
please.
General form of capital. Gonna be talking about capital first.
Okay, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, no, I actually also remember that one.
How are you
Um, wait, 4, 5, and 6?
I know.
No.
Wait, let me see how much that is. Okay, that's 40 pages. It's less than 36 pages.
Yeah.
And it's like it's the
It's the
spiciest part.
spiciest one. Wait,
Wait, it's not even. Yo, do it. It's what is it? 33 pages.
These are in the call, though. Like, you go to a coffee shop real quick, or you don't want to?
I want to like make a point. I don't know if I'll be able to make. Oh man, I don't think I'll be able to make next time's call like key sauce. So I probably won't. Man, I'll select the one after that, or maybe y'all won't finish.
Hey, we have to go, but this was a really nice conversation. I'll see you guys next week.
Do you want to facilitate by any chance? Or
I don't think it would be a good week for me because I have to move out this week, so I'll probably be pretty busy.
okay. Okay, cool. Okay, y'all take care then.
All right, bye.
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 Good to see you guys. Okay, so wait. Does anybody else want to facilitate?
I can try, I guess.
I'm just like torn.
So to facilitate, I just need to like have some organization, right? And then share. Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Cool.
Okay, Zach. Cool.
Much Zach.
Thanks, Zach.
I have a little bit of an anecdote. While I was reading Capital, somebody approached me and paid me $5 to be in their TikTok. So now it's my bookmark.
The TikTok. What were you doing in the TikTok, Dan?
It was absurd. It was so dumb. I had to like pretend to buy this dude's mixtapes, but they were just actually DVD cases with like Sharpie scrawled on them, and it was like Batman Begins, and he's like, check out my mixtape, and I was like,
Was that TikTok?
what?
It was that TikTok?
Yeah, you know about it? It's
Yeah, it's big.
Okay. Yeah, it's a famous bit. Yeah. So now I'm so I couldn't pass up. They recorded it the first time and then they were like, oh, we had audio issues. Can you do it again? And I was like, I guess I can't pass up being famous. Like and yeah, it was strange. I'll find out. I have their it's it was called The Crowd Pleaser, THA, and then pleaser with a Z.
That's fucked.
Okay. Rojas, thank you so much for facilitating. That was so smooth.
Chill. Thank you. It's fun.
You're in your element.
For real. Also, Zach, it was so good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, excited for next week. This was so good. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
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 Love y'all.
Love you guys.